Every team, every topic, everywhere. This is Believe.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt. Als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht.
Hello and welcome to Gegenpressing, the German football podcast from the Football Grad Network. I'm your host, Bryce Dunn, and joining me, as always, is Chris Williams. Chris, how's your week been?
Busy, Bryce. Very busy, thank you, but enjoyable.
Aye, good stuff. You're always busy, Chris. Always the same, mate.
Well, I don't know about that.
Too modest, I think. But another busy man joining us is Manuel Veth.
Hey, Bryce, how are you doing?
Not too bad. It's a long time since I spoke to you.
Less than 24 hours, I believe.
Yes, that's very right. Podcast after podcast, eh? But in true Gegenpressing fashion, Borussia Gladbach lost this weekend, so that obviously means that Jon Mackenzie is joining us as well. John, how are you?
Yeah, wonderful as always.
Ah, there he is. Oh, we missed you, John. I insisted that you should have come in last week, but oh well. Guys, let's just jump into the Friday night game. But there was plenty of talk now the transfer window is closed about how new players would get on just with their new site. That obviously brings us to Borussia Dortmund, who sold Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who we kind of suspected might be the case. He always flirts with the transfer window, but this time it seemed a little bit different, and he's moved over to Arsenal. That means coming in on loan from Chelsea is Michy Batshuayi, and what a debut he's had. As we've seen, Dortmund beats Cologne 3-2, a game that we had all suspected that Cologne may actually come out on top, as they've been in good form recently, but that wasn't to be the case, and Batshuayi, well, scored 2 on his debut. Well, let's go to our guest, John. John, how big a signing is this for Dortmund? And I suppose the question everyone's asking is Batshuayi the man to make a difference, and is he the Aubameyang replacement?
I know you've come to me on purpose because I must put my hand on my heart and say that I did say that I thought his signing was a little bit rubbish. I think was the polite word that I used. When it comes to Michy Batshuayi, how do I feel he will fit in at Dortmund? I think it's an interesting one because obviously Dortmund being out of the Champions League, knowing that they were going to lose Aubameyang, they knew they needed to get a player who was going to be able to score goals for them in the league and also in the Europa League. And Batshuayi has obviously come in, proven that he can do that already with a couple of goals in what was actually a fantastic game, by the way. My issues with Batshuayi, the reason why I'm a little bit hesitant is because I'm not entirely sure that he would be great against the bigger opponents. Obviously, Köln, however you view them at the moment, despite the fact that they are playing probably slightly higher than a 20th place team in the Bundesliga, are not the best team in the league. So the interesting thing to see will be how does Batshuayi fit into the Dortmund team when they come up against other opponents. The example that I like to go to here is that there was many Man United fans very, very happy when they had a Belgian striker join them who started off scoring many goals, but those goals have since dried up, and it'll be interesting to see how Batshuayi fits in at the same time. And another Belgian striker incidentally scored for Werder Bremen at the weekend, and that was Divock Origi. And we wouldn't want to claim that because a Belgian striker can score in the Bundesliga, they are therefore a great striker. So that's my position on Batshuayi. I think he's good, but it will be interesting to see how he fits in the long term. If they were to go on to get Champions League football again, is he going to be the sort of caliber of striker who is really going to perform for them in the big games?
To be fair though, John, they don't even know that themselves. That's why they only brought him in on loan till the end of the season, right?
Yeah.
Because I think they're really not sure themselves. But I think I described it as patchwork. in the article that I wrote. It's someone that was available for the Europa League, someone who's in mid-season they could get for free because Arsenal actually is paying the money for the loan deal, the 1.5 million euros paid for by Arsenal. So it's a free transfer.
Yeah.
Right. And then they basically, I see this as an extended scouting or extended training session with Dortmund until the end of the season, where he can show either he's good enough and they will negotiate with Chelsea a deal, or he's not and they'll go for someone else.
Yeah. The question, I think, is whether or not this season is going to be a good enough indicator of how he can perform against the big teams. But I suppose that's where the Europa League will come in.
John, may I just ask, obviously you're saying that he seems to have proven to score against the smaller sides for the likes of maybe Chelsea, but he's going to be really tested against the tougher teams. But what is it about him that you're just not convinced by? I mean, if you look at, he played at Standard Liège, obviously at quite a young age. He scored nearly 40 goals. You know, Marseille, he got 26 and 62. I mean, what is it that's you're not convinced by?
Well, to play devil's advocate against myself, I think one of the problems when trying to assess how good a striker is that we often look at a striker compared to maybe a more well-rounded player like a central midfielder or something like that, and we attempt to understand whether or not a player is good based on that. But obviously a striker has a very, very narrow skill set of things that they have to do well at in order to be successful. And the bottom line of that conversation is always going to be, is this player scoring goals? And Batshuayi scored 2 at the weekends. And so it will be hard for me to argue that I don't think he's going to perform that well, on the basis of that. If Batshuayi can score lots and lots of goals against the teams up to 6th or 7th place, I don't think Dortmund will really mind so much. Although it is very, very close, obviously. Second position to 8th position. If he can score goals against those sides, I suppose that does justify his inclusion as well. So I'm gonna put my criticisms on the cooler at the moment and see how he performs. But my whenever I've watched him play, I've always found him to be a little bit of a. Again, it's hard to talk about someone looking clumsy as a footballer, because I think sometimes you can watch Harry Kane play, for example, and he can look a little bit ungainly. But whenever I've seen Batshuayi play for Chelsea this season and the season before, I did have issues with his link-up play. He will play as a lone striker, and the question is whether or not Dortmund are actually going to start playing in a way that just looks to find the big man up top, as it were, compared to maybe what they were doing with Aubameyang, who was a little bit more of a link-up player, who did like to drop in a little bit deeper and start attacks off and link the midfield and the striking areas as well, which we saw him actually do for Arsenal at the weekend. His goal was actually quite a nice link up. One of the goals that Arsenal scored was a nice link up between Mkhitaryan and Aubameyang. So the question is whether or not Batshuayi is going to be a bit more of a facilitator in that role, or whether or not he is going to be a target man who they're just going to, like Manu says, find the player in the right place at the right time. If he can do that, great. But then the question is, what happens when they come up against teams who maybe sit a bit deeper? What happens when they're struggling to find the goal?
You know, John, maybe to answer that question a little bit, I went back and looked at his statistics before Chelsea, and that was at the Olympique Marseille, of course, in Ligue 1. And in his last season there, he scored 17 goals, but he also had 9 assists. Right. And he had an assist in this game as well. And when you look at Aubameyang's score, there was a video that went around, and I think a statistic as well. I think it was Opta France, but I'm not 100% sure. And I think 90% of Aubameyang's goals were actually just tapped inside the box.
Yeah.
Oh, so I think that's really what you're looking for. But you know what I'm really curious about? I'm curious about Chris's opinion on this whole thing.
Yeah, bring him in. Chris, do you think that Batshuayi is a straight swap for Aubameyang? And where do you sit in the whole Batshuayi camp? Good or bad?
I don't think he's a straight swap, because it's no secret that Dortmund wanted Giroud, but he was part of this love triangle that went on the deadline day, which saw Batshuayi end up at Dortmund. I mean, you can only go by his first game and what he's done, which is score 2. Actually, he scored 3, but one of them was ruled out for offside correctly. I don't think if VAR's there, then that's ruled out. So he would have got a hat-trick, and he's got an assist. So it's pretty much a perfect spot for him. I thought he was very, very lively. I thought he looked very hungry, but then it's his debut and he wants to do well. He obviously wanted to get off to a flyer, and he's done that. So for me, the test's going to be in the next 2 or 3 games to see if that hunger's there throughout. And as Jon and Manu have said, if it goes a little bit wrong, how does he recover from that? Because if we're going to talk about strikers moving from England to Germany, then Divock Origi had a couple of good games and then fell straight off the radar for Wolfsburg. I was there the other week to watch him have a bit. He didn't do very much in the way of things right. Looked like the player that played at Liverpool last season and the season before. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. And I think he's quite right. He's going to be a stopgap. And, you know, if he goes and scores 10 or 15 goals between now and the end of the season, he might get himself a permanent move, or Chelsea might recall him because they've got their own striker issues. So we'll have to wait and see. But I'm very much in agreement with Jon and Manu that this probably wasn't the ideal scenario for Dortmund, but it's got them off to, you know, a good start. And I think it was crucial that Sturger had to win this game. And what a great game it was. I live blogged it and then did match report for Football Stat. And yeah, it was one to get the weekend off to a flyer.
I think
certainly.
I think, Bryce, maybe to add to this game, yes, Köln are last, the 18th in this league. But this was a game that all of us last week, we were really doubting Dortmund would win this, just based on all the stuff that's going on, you know, and there was so much focus on this game that you could easily be distracted as a player in yellow and black. The Batshuayi thing, Aubameyang leaving, Peter Stöger coming back. This game was a circus. And then Köln, of course, their resurgence, all these injured players are coming back, right? They're looking like a real Bundesliga team again. And they are currently a side that has to win every single game. And you saw this in this game. They are a very tough team to play right now simply because they're fighting for their very own lives. And I think this game, this could really set something in motion for Dortmund, because this was a game that didn't just come down to technical skills and ability, but it also came just down to sweat, blood and tears. And I think winning a game like that really can get things going for a side.
Now more than ever, it's important to keep your family's garments free from bacteria. Fortunately, the Turbo Extreme Steam handheld steamer kills 99.9% of bacteria on face masks, shoes, coats, and any other garments they may wear when they venture outside the home. It's the most powerful handheld steamer with the turbo setting that quickly smooths away even the toughest of wrinkles. Works great on all kinds of clothes, delicates, shirts, you name it. Heats up fast and gives clothes that professionally pressed look in minutes. Try it and find out for yourself. Go to conair.com and search Turbo Extreme Steam.
It wouldn't be the holiday season if there wasn't candy, right? Celebrate the holiday season with the Holiday Crush. They've sprinkled candy with a holiday theme and fun-packed challenges every week for 5 whole weeks, finishing on January 4th. The more challenges you complete, the better your chances of unwrapping delicious rewards. So, are you ready to crush the holidays? Play the Holiday Crush now. Download it from the App Store, Google Play, or Windows Store for free. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, definitely. They'll be happy with that result. They've had to battle a little bit for it, and beating a Cologne team in good form, you know, I'm sure Sturger will be very happy, especially against his old. Nice. Who was the last foreign player to come to the Bundesliga and score a brace on his debut? Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, eh? So there's a little similarity for you. But anyway, Chris, I just want to go back to you briefly. We talked about possibly Batshuayi being a bit of patchwork for the Dortmund side, maybe not being the ideal transfer that they were looking to bring in. But they've said, Zoric's come out this week and said that, you know, they're going to continue to sell big players and develop young players. I mean, what exactly does this mean for the club? Does it mean that they're a developing and selling club, that they'll never reach the peaks of the likes of Bayern Munich, or what's your stance on this?
I don't know if he meant that as in they're going to be a selling club, because you temper that with, he also said the next player who tries to put us under pressure will be watching from the stands. So that will say that if there's a repeat of Dembele and Aubameyang, then he'll quite happily let them rot on the side of the pitch watching, which is, you know, what we both, Manu and I, said maybe should have happened to Aubameyang a little bit earlier. But also said today is you can almost make a team of the players that Dortmund have not taken a strong stance on. And in fact, DW Sports did that, didn't they, with Lehmann and Hummels, and even Torgen Frings made the side, and Yondon, Rosicky, Perisic, Mkhitaryan, Dembele, and Aubameyang. They also included Lewandowski, but our friend Raphael Honigstein very quickly pointed out that he wasn't sold. In fact, he left. So, they have got form for players moving on and stepping stone, and it's almost an equal split between Bayern and Arsenal, funnily enough. I think Zorc's being realistic. The Bundesliga is a fantastic league. I know that, you know that, everybody knows that watches it. But the draw of the Premier League is just something massive. So when players get to a certain level, like Leroy Sané did, they're going to be looked at for what is stupid money at the end of the day. And clubs will always, unfortunately, they'll always take that. You only have to look at Naby Keita and RB Leipzig. Liverpool came in with a tremendous amount of money for him to be bought out of his release clause, and they went for it. So I don't think it is going to be a thing where Dortmund develop all of their players and they all go, but I think he's realistic to say that they're not going to be able to keep hold of them in today's current climate for the money that teams, especially in the Liga and the Premier League, are offering.
Yes, indeed. It'll be interesting to see just what transfers do happen in the summer with them, and whether Batshuayi can score enough goals to stay. He's got Hamburg coming up next, so he'll probably be rubbing his hands together. Guys, I mentioned Bayern Munich. I feel we have to touch on them. They've moved to 18 points clear at the top of the league. Obviously, we'd like that to be a little bit closer, but all credit to them. They're firing on all cylinders, it would seem. They put away Mainz this weekend, 2-0 victory, and that man, James Rodriguez, played out of his skin once again. John, is it because it's World Cup year? I mean, we've seen him move to Real Madrid after the last World Cup. Is there something about him in the World Cup that just gets him going?
Well, yeah, he was fantastic last time round. I think he got the Golden Boot in the tournament in 2014. Yeah, it's good to see him playing again, and it'll be exciting to see how he can get Colombia performing. I think he's a fantastic player. I think Real Madrid have really messed up getting rid of him, and Bayern have done a really astute bit of business bringing him in. Obviously, I think it's a loan with an option buy at the end, so everything's looking good for Bayern, as it always does.
Yeah, it definitely does look good for them, and that looks like it could be a hell of a bit of business for them. Manu, James Rodriguez, we've obviously mentioned that he looks like a rather bright player, a bright future player for them, for Bayern to base their team around. I mean, if we just look at, he's played in a total of 15 games. He started 12. He scored 4 and assisted in 6. I mean, that is extremely impressive, isn't it? And Bayern just are very efficient at the moment.
They are very efficient, and we were talking yesterday about players that could shine at the World Cup. We highlighted Hirving Lozano, and we linked Hirving Lozano as maybe the next James Rodriguez. But here's one for you, Bryce. Maybe James Rodriguez will be the next James Rodriguez, because he had a fantastic World Cup in 2014 and then moved to Real Madrid and didn't really ever completely fulfill that promise that he showed at the World Cup, and kind of fell off the radar a little bit, but it's back at stupendous form for Bayern right now, and could be once again making this World Cup his biggest stage. Not that he will move anywhere bigger. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that Bayern are going to trigger that clause, that 40 million euro clause, and sign him in a deal that's, when you think about it, they're going to pay 53 million altogether for this guy. In the current market, that's unbelievable. And I think that it is an astute signing by Bayern, but it's also, when you look at what he brings to that side, it's tremendous. He has basically been able to, Thiago, who we may have suggested that he could be on his way out at the end of the year, it was often misses games with injuries. No one is talking about Thiago right now. Why? Because James Rodriguez holds together that midfield. He's a real playmaker. He's something that Bayern needs. And right now it looks like he's more than just a backup for Thiago. He's actually in some ways better because he's a bit more dangerous in front of the goal. And I think that's just something that Bayern needed, but it's also maybe something that the league needed. Someone like James Rodriguez playing there, because he adds a lot of star power. Of course, there's a lot of other stars playing for Bayern as well, but you know, that South American flair. And I think I read somewhere, I think James is the player, the player with the third most followers on social media. You know, that is something that the league really needs as well. And Bayern, of course, needs something like that too. It's to think that they're going to pay 53 million in the end of the day, to make this deal permanent. That's just maybe the steal of the century, when it comes to transfers.
Yeah, and it definitely appears that would be the case. It doesn't seem to be anyone suggesting that they wouldn't complete that transfer with the form that he has been in. Chris, obviously we see Bayern, as I said, sailing head and shoulders above anyone else in the league table. Not so good for the league, but the rest of the league don't seem to be particularly helping themselves. I mean, they've got Schalke next in the late kickoff on the Saturday. And I mean, for example, you know, they threw away a lead at the weekend, didn't they? Getting man sent off and then losing.
Yeah, we talked about this the other week, the fact that Bayern are being very Bayern about things and going on and winning the games, and the competition below them. If you just take Bayern out of the situation at the moment and you look at the table from second all the way down to, well, you could go down to ninth, which is as far down as, in fact, 10th, which is as far down as Hanover. So second is Bayer Leverkusen on 35, and then 10th Hanover on 28. So those teams in and around that from second to 10th are quite fluid at the moment, and it's changing from match day to match day. And I think, as we identified a few weeks ago, this is a problem why Bayern are running away with it, because Bayern are managing to beat teams week in, week out, and the others are so fiercely competitive between each other that they are unable to beat each other. It's almost like, anyone that watches NASCAR, it's almost like a NASCAR race from second till 10th, and then Bayern have just jumped in with an Indy car and are happy to brat round faster than everybody else in a different car, in a different engine. So whilst the likes of Schalke are dropping points, you know, Dortmund have dropped points religiously the last few weeks. It's only, you know, they just about scraped 3 points on Friday night. Eintracht have been doing very well. We've covered them in the last couple of games. Bayer Leverkusen, Leipzig have picked up points and dropped them on occasion. So it's very, very tight if you take out the first. And I think Bayern are so far ahead of everybody because they are just so much better than everyone, and not in a bad way. The other teams are fiercely competitive with each other. They're just more equally matched. And unfortunately, that's why we've got such a big gap at the top of the table. But if you just discount Bayern, it's a very, very close league at the top. And even still at the bottom with Cologne, you know, unfortunately not winning on the weekend for them, they sort of dropped out of the race a little bit, but they're still keeping Hamburg in check by, you know, being only a few points behind them.
Yeah, most certainly. As you said, the teams seem to be swapping places below them, but yeah, they seem to be a different beast altogether. Manu, obviously, I mentioned Schalke and how they, well, practically threw away a leading position by getting a man sent off, a very poor start to the second half. I mean, this is just the perfect example, isn't it, of the sides below not really having much consistency. I mean, second place is almost there for the taking, but nobody seems to want it at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Although I suspect that there will be a couple teams that will kick into high gear and probably walk away with the standings. I think that Dortmund and Leverkusen in particular, I think they have to. Leverkusen has probably been the most consistent. They had a poor start this season and then were relatively consistent, although they dropped points to Freiburg as well. I think that there is going to be a couple of teams walking away with a Champions League spot, and then as we get deeper into the second half of the season, I think that that fourth spot will be highly contested. But Schalke is going to be one of those teams that have to watch it a little bit, in my opinion, because ever since that Leon Goretzka signing to Bayern was announced, they have they have been struggling a little bit. They only won one of the 4 matches since the winter break. And it seems like that everything that was so positive about the club has kind of gone upside down a little bit. And I personally wonder if that is because of Leon Goretzka. But there's also, of course, the question about Max Meyer. What's his future going to be like? Is he going to stay at Schalke, or is he going to, I mean, there's links with a bunch of English clubs. There's links with other teams in Germany as well. Is he going to sign a new contract there, or is he going to leave as well? And I think that is maybe a little bit too much of uncertainty right now at the club. And I think they have to really watch it, because of the top sides that did really well the first half of the season, I think they're the ones in the biggest danger of maybe dropping out of there.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Just Max Meyer being thrown up in the air as well. It's more off-field issues for Schalke. But let's move over to the late kickoff game on Saturday. We've seen RB Leipzig taking on Borussia Mönchengladbach. What looked to be set to be a 0-0 draw. RB Leipzig managed to get a goal rather late on. This was, they faced each other in I've been told to say this, top spiel. Is that right, Manu? That's crunch match.
No, that sounds perfect.
Oh, okay, that wasn't too bad. But anyway, I feel we have to go to John. Sorry to go to more misery for you, but I'm sure you've got a lot to say about this game. But both sides lacked something, didn't they?
Yeah, I think both sides did lack something. And I mean, we've mentioned it already, but Borussia Mönchengladbach, they play in a very specific way. They play in a 4-2-2-2, and their 2 at the top is made up of 2 players who very much aren't last man strikers in Raphael and Lars Stindl. And I think it's really harmed them this season. And I think probably one of the biggest upsets to the Gladbach season so far has actually been getting rid of Andre Hahn at the beginning of the season, because Gladbach have missed that striker who you can just put on throw up at the front and use them as either a hold-up player or as an out-and-out striker. We've tried doing it with Raul Bobadilla. That's not really worked. And then below that, you're sort of looking at for your Villalbas, etc. And really, really not a huge amount that we've been able to go with in that regard. I think actually looking back at the game, I watched a replay of it earlier, and Leipzig probably were just about worth the win. Leipzig have obviously been in a funny position too. I watched the Leipzig-Freiburg game at Freiburg a couple of weeks ago. And again, Leipzig look as though at the moment that they're relying on Timo Werner. Timo Werner is a standout player, and in that game he did score that fantastic goal. And it felt again a little bit like both teams in this match were similar. Neither team had a particularly standout player, and it just took a moment of, I'll say, brilliance to be kind, but Adam Ola Lookman, his shot on target was the difference between the teams. And it's a problem, I think, for both of those teams. And I wonder whether or not, interestingly enough, they both play a sort of 4-4-2 hybrid, a 4-2-2-2 game. The two teams are suffering because obviously in a 4-2-2-2 you have a lot more constriction on your forward players, so they have to move laterally a lot more than a normal 4-4-2. So I wonder whether or not there are fitness concerns coming in now, and with like I've said with Gladbach, a lack of real options up front. The same has happened at Leipzig. I think Jean-Kevin Augustin has not been the heir and successor to Josef Poulsen that people thought that he would be, and so it'll be interesting to see how Lookman comes on. But he's a young player. He's just coming into a new league, so I don't think they're going to hold out too much hope that he's going to be the difference between them and other teams as well. So, yeah, a frustrating match, I think, for both sides. Leipzig will be pleased with the win, but I think probably just about worth it.
I mean, we'll go to Chris on this one just to speak a little bit more about Lookman. He's obviously on loan from Everton. There's talk that Sam Allardyce didn't want him to go abroad, wanted him to stay in England. I mean, we've seen glimpses in the Premier League just how lively he can be. Seems like he's got some real talent there, and at a young age could develop into something special. Apparently Leipzig were interested in him when he was at his prior club, Charlton even, and now they've finally got their man. I mean, are you happy that he's made the decision over there, Chris? And how do you feel Leipzig will help him develop as a player?
Well, two questions there. Am I happy? Yes, because he made Big Sam look a fool straight away, didn't he? So as a Liverpool fan, it's always good to see an Everton manager be made a fool of. But in all seriousness, I think he has to be respected for making the move he wanted to. He said he wanted to go. He was lambasted by Allardyce. Allardyce used the example of Oliver Burke. He said, well, Oliver Burke went and he didn't enjoy it. He couldn't wait to get home. So if we're going to say just because one British player went to Germany and didn't like it, that no more should go, that's probably what the gist of Sam Allardyce was saying, which is absolutely crazy. Lookman is obviously got confidence in himself to go to a new country, to try and learn a new language, and to get this time playing football. I wrote an article last week for Football Stat about why is the Bundesliga looking to be the destination for English players. Go and put in an article that how many more of the under-17 winning squad would have to look to leave England to get games. And this is another example of a young English player having to go abroad to get the sort of game times. And I think it comes, we spoke to Peterborough United academy coach for that, and he said that it comes with the pressure from Premier League managers who just don't have the time or the risk adverse to develop young players in the spotlight. Because had he played Lookman over at Arsenal and they got hammered 5-1 straight away, everybody's saying to him, why are you playing a kid in such a high profile game? And I don't think you get that sort of pressure on managers and head coaches in Germany. There's a lot more look towards development of players, and you can see that in the national side. The fact that there's 50 players that can play an 11-a-side match, that the Germans could take to the World Cup. But I think it's good he's gone. And what can he get from the loan deal? Well, he's going to get game time. I'm pretty sure Everton won't have let him go into a deal that says he has to play once, or how many times he can play, or how many minutes. But he's going to get game time in it, and you can see how much it meant to Leipzig when he scored, because Ralph Hasenhüttl stormed down the side, didn't he, in very celebration style, a little bit like Jurgen Klopp does, and he was really happy. But as Jon's mentioned, it wasn't the best game. I did the match report, also did the live blog for the site, and I thought it was going to be a tremendous game from start to finish, and it wasn't. And you could probably gather the best bits of it from the last 20 minutes onwards. But if anybody's a Gladbach fan, it's not very good watching. They weren't very good against Wolfsburg against Eintracht Frankfurt last week, and they weren't very good this week either. And I think one of the most disappointing parts of me was Lars Stindl, who was more interested in kicking lumps out of Naby Keita for 45 minutes than he was in trying to get hold of the ball. So they're obviously going through a bit of a bad patch with Dieter Hecking at the moment, which is a shame for them, because had they have won the last two games, which they were probably capable of doing, they would be a lot higher at the table.
Yeah, most certainly. It'll be interesting to see how he develops there, and just how much maybe Leipzig end up relying on him and a few of the other players that maybe you put a bit of pressure on them to try and get that Champions League spot. Manu seems to fancy Leverkusen, doesn't he, as he keeps reminding us. But interesting enough, Hasenhüttl said that he almost didn't play Lookman because he insisted on wearing his lucky boots, which he used in training on Friday, and he said he was falling all over the place and he almost didn't play him because of it. Well, I somehow think Ralph will have to put up with him for a little bit longer. But Manu, if we just continue on the theme of Englishmen, it appears Leipzig have hired former Tottenham scouts, Paul Mitchell. What do you think this will mean? Do you think more English talent, just like as Chris had mentioned, will end up at Leipzig, and not just with the rest of the Premier League, but them especially?
That's a good question. I mean, maybe this is something that you should also put to Chris and Jon. I personally think that there is a lot of talent right now in academies in English football, and that's because the Premier League teams have a lot of money and they put a lot of money into these academies, and as a result, they're producing a lot of players. And at the same time, this is perhaps a cultural thing and of the Premier League in general, that coaches in England seem to be a lot more hesitant about playing young, talented players. And this is not just English players, young players in general. I mean, when you look at the transfers of Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and Mkhitaryan to Arsenal, for example, these two players are 29 years old. That's nearing retirement age for your average Bundesliga player. And I'm not saying this lightly. It's actually true. With 30, 31, there's very few players in the Bundesliga that are still considered in their prime. And it's maybe a cultural thing. I mean, Ralf Rangnick himself likes players to be very young because he believes that their hard drive isn't wired. So I think a lot of Bundesliga coaches think that way, that they can form players a bit more and that they are more willing to therefore take the risk to play them because, you get a bit more that of creative spark, that create a bit more of, that street football almost kind of, stuff that you don't see later on when players have sort of set in with the tactics, etc. That they get their head filled with while they're playing at the big clubs. So maybe it's a youthfulness, this energy that they like to see. And then of course the league also, they don't have the same kind of television money that England do. So they have to focus on finding players before they become stars and make them into stars and keep some and sell others and make money. And it's a business model. Sadly, I think that's how it is. And I mean, John, England right now, I believe the U17 and the U21 tournaments this summer. So there is a lot of talent in the United Kingdom right now. And there seems to be a really good escape route for some of them rather than sitting on a bench somewhere in the Premier League.
Yeah, I think it very much is. You're right. Under 17s won the World Cup. I think the under 20s won the Toulon tournament. The under 21s got to the semi-finals of the Euros, and then the under 19s won the World Cup as well. So it's definitely been the best youth year that we've had for the young Lions. And there are a huge amount of very good players coming through, some of whom have been at Manchester City. We've seen, obviously, Jadon Sancho has gone over to Dortmund, but you've got players like Phil Foden as well, who has been getting game time, obviously not as much as you'd want. But as we've said before, the Premier League is all about, it's a big risk league. There's so much money in it that the solution to perceived problems has always been to throw more money at the problem. And when it comes to youth players, you simply cannot really give them any sort of development time in that sort of system. So yeah, where it used to be the case that the teams at the bottom of the table would be the teams where you would see youth development being done, and Southampton is obviously the classic example of that. Even those teams now are spending money in a bid to buy their way out of relegation. So we saw a number of clubs at the bottom of the Premier League spending a huge amount of money over the January transfer window. Obviously, that's not the same in the Bundesliga, and so the Bundesliga is a really fertile ground to send these very talented kids over. And I think it should be beneficial for both the English leagues in the long run, but also the Bundesliga in the short run. The only problem I have with this sort of easy narrative, which says, kids can go over to the Bundesliga and they'll get time, is that there are a few kids who've already been over the Bundesliga and haven't really kicked off. I mean, Reece Oxford is an example of that. I know he has been getting a little bit more game time right at the end of the Hinrunde. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not in the Rückrunde he actually gets played a little bit more. But I think, I'm a firm believer that the way that you develop players is by giving them game time in senior football, in stadium situations, in matches which matter. And if the Bundesliga can do that, then it will be a real for English players. It will be a real benefit for English football in the long run.
The problem we've had in England, or the problem that they've had in England, as in the English clubs, is about 10, 12 years ago, the FA quite rightly decided that you can't teach kids to play football the same way as you teach adults. So they completely redesigned the youth football package. They brought in what's called the England DNA, which means that players have to attain certain levels before they move on. They brought in the academy structure at the very top level at the Cat 1 side, and they brought it to a more harmonised level so the teams are playing equally. And that produced a fantastic array of talent, which John's quite rightly mentioned, that they've won prestigious tournaments across the world and in Europe. But now there's just this almost blockage that the new style of player that's been brought through hasn't got the chance to play in the full league, because the full league, unfortunately, is dominated by money, and chairmen, lose millions and millions of pounds on the fact that teams are either relegated or just scrape in the league. And if you want to tell a Premier League chairman that he can play 4 19-year-olds, or he can go out and spend 10 million in order to save 50 million, I know what his answer will be straight away.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. And see, I'm totally for British players as well going abroad. I think it's only a good thing for their development as as they get a little bit older. That experience can only do them good.
I think, but Bryce, there is a danger though in this, and this is, I think, something that we also need to discuss. Is the Bundesliga then just becoming a farm league for the Premier League? This is not just looking at English players going over and obviously be getting their development in the Bundesliga, but it's also, I mean, we've seen Ousmane Dembele come to the Bundesliga at 18 and then leave 1 year later, right? So I think it's great that the Bundesliga are tapping up these talent, and yes, they will always have to sell some of them, but what is necessary to keep these players in the country? And to stop this outflow, right? Sort of what we talked about with Sorg early on, right, Chris, is how are you going to be able to sort of make the next step as a club? And this is several clubs, because right now the only team that do not have to sell are Bayern. How are you making that next step? That is something that I think is really fascinating, and it really ties well in with this whole debate.
Well, I suppose that is going to bring us to our next topic, isn't it? But I was going to say investment. Surely, if you've got plenty of money to keep these players, then they don't have to leave. And unfortunately, that's what football seems to come down to: either winning things or investment. I mean, we even see Spurs, even if they do get in the Champions League, it's going to be hard for them to keep players because they don't pay enough. They've got a wage structure. But I suppose that brings us on to our next topic. Which I suppose we've seen this week. Hanover's Martin Keane, maybe that's pronounced, sorry. He's requested to take over the club, hasn't he? But he's paused that for now. Manuel, I'm sure you'll be able to fill us in a bit more in depth about this. And this is partly because of the 50+1 rule, which we've spoke about in the past. But if you want to very quickly recap anyone that's maybe a recent listener that doesn't know about this, then you're more than welcome to at this point.
Yeah, so maybe to just really quickly explain what the 50+1 rule is. Most clubs, the grand majority of clubs in the Bundesliga are operated, or the teams that are actually playing in the league, they have their foundation as a membership club, but the actual teams the actual structure that runs the professional soccer club is usually a joint stock company, open or closed in various forms. So the rule 50+1 states that the membership club, which is the base of the football operation, has to hold 50+1 shares of the joint stock company that operates the football business, right? This is to ensure that the members of the various teams around the league always have a say in how the club is run. Now, there are a couple exceptions. Wolfsburg is one. They are owned by Volkswagen. Volkswagen, a majority owner of VfL Wolfsburg, and Bayer Leverkusen. And that's the reason for that is because both those teams were founded as company teams, or there have been continuous investments over 20 years. The other exception is Hoffenheim. Hoffenheim with Dietmar Hopp. Dietmar Hopp has been an investor at the team, has made significant investments for more than 20 years now, so he was granted an exception rule. Now, Martin Kind has been an investor for over 20 years as well. As of this year, he has been now an investor for 20 years at the club. Now, usually that would have been enough to allow him to become the majority owner of the joint stock company that operates the professional soccer team. Now, the issue is that the DFL is currently not sure what significant investment means. It actually does say in the rule, significant investment. They have come up with this formula now, and again, it is actually not written down that way. This 50+1 rule was anchored into the DFL laws in 1998. So, it's not actually specified what significant investment is. They have said, okay, well, significant investment is on average that the investor has paid more on average than the biggest sponsor of the club. That's not the case with Martin Kind. So there has been now talk that Martin Kind would be turned down by the DFL, that he would not be allowed to take over the club. Now, the big fear, of course, is that he would sue, because he has said in the past that he will sue against 50+1, and there is very little chance that 50+1 will actually hold up in a court of law because of European Union compliance laws. So they are now looking at various different models to change 50+1, because they don't want to lose this model, because they don't want that free flow capitalist investments that is seen in other leagues. So this is really where the debate is at. Today, the news is, of course, is that Martin Kind is resting his case for now, and he's waiting to see what other clubs and the DFL are sort of cooking up to maybe change this rule slightly or alter this rule.
Well, there we go. John, let's go to you. I mean, are you pro or against the 50+1 rule? I mean, a lot of people will say that it's, as Manu pointed out, Joe, it keeps the league, still, and the players still, or it keeps the league and the fans still in touch with the players and the staff and their club, instead of investment. But then maybe without the investment, we see players leave.
Yeah, I think it's a tricky one, isn't it? I instinctively want to say something along the lines of I like the 50+1 rule, because I like the fact that it does allow you to have that broken down binary between the fan and the club, which you don't, and players even as well, that you don't get so much in British football anymore. And when I was in Freiburg the other day, I was actually made quite aware of the fact that the relationship between fans and players is so much different over in Germany. And when you go to watch matches in the UK these days, particularly at the top, obviously, it's very much like going to the opera, where you spend a lot of money and you end up experiencing a spectacle, and then you leave at the end. Whereas at Freiburg, it was entirely different. We arrived early to the game, and there was already a crowd there. There was people drinking beer, eating bratwurst in the stands. There was a great atmosphere. After the game, the players engaged in some kind of ritual with the ultras, and one of the players went up into the stand and sung songs, and there was a celebration because they'd beaten Leipzig that day. And then afterwards we went down and stood by the coach, which was just right out the back of the stadium, and there was the players, the home players, just simply walked right through the crowds and signed autographs and had photos. It was very much a different experience entirely, and for me it was quite refreshing, having experienced the British scene for so long. So part of me wants to say, 50+1 is great, but part of me is also aware that, I am British, and I don't necessarily look at the German context and think, right, I want my footballing context to keep up with the rest of Europe. And this is the question, right? Does the 50+1 rule hold German clubs back from competing in Europe? Is that a problem? And what would happen if the 50+1 rule was kept in place? Would it mean that the league grew further and further away from maybe some of the other more money driven leagues? Now, it may be the case that might be a good thing for German football, but I'm not entirely sure that a lot of German fans would buy that argument. And the way that I've always looked at 50+1 is that it's very good for fan ownership. It's very good for fan experience and stuff. But where it does fall down is that it is impossible to catch up with the leaders. So Bayern are never going to get caught up with, from a financial point of view, because 50+1 protects them from being necessarily. I think Manu might disagree with me here, but I think it does protect you from being caught up with by maybe a billionaire coming in, buying one of the clubs, and then pumping money into it within the rules. And so for me, 50+1 is sort of a little bit like feudalism. And if the 50+1 rule does actually get deconstructed, then it may be the case that capitalism could make the Bundesliga a little more even. But I guess we would have to wait and see what happened if they did get rid of the 50+1 rule.
I mean, John makes some fantastic points there. I think he's covered most of the points, to be honest. But Chris, I want to hear your feeling on the 50+1 rule. And do you think it's because, partly as John said, we've grown up with the British leagues, the Premier League especially, and you can get a little bit disgruntled with it, them almost being money-making machines in a way, and then we see the Bundesliga that is a little bit almost more pure, if I don't even know if that's the right word. We like the closeness to the players and the staff and the club, and the stands, for example. Do you think that's what it is?
It's a really tough one, isn't it? Because at the end of the day, there's thousands of British people making their way over to Germany now to get the experience that we've all seen firsthand many a time. And they do that because that is no longer available in the UK. I mean, take out the lower leagues, and John's a Leeds fan, and they have a fantastic atmosphere at Ellen Road. But at the end of the day, the football isn't maybe the spectacle that people want to see on the pitch. So they get that in Germany. They get to see good, close football play to a high, decent level in an atmosphere where they can drink and eat and party and be happy. And it's certainly one of the main reasons that drew me to German football many years ago. And it's one of the reasons that keeps me going back and back and back. Even sitting in the press box, you can still soak up the atmosphere on the standing terraces behind the goals. You can pick up on just the atmosphere along the sides, even though it's full of families. It's families that are still having fun going to the football. They're not what we call in the UK tourists, taking pictures and selfies with half and half scarves and then buying hundreds of pounds worth of gear in a shop and leaving. That's the sort of supporter that English clubs are looking for, because it drives the money. And if 50+1 is holding German clubs back, there'd be an argument for it to go. But if it was to go and the Bundesliga was to just become another Premier League, as in a cash cow league, then that would be a great shame. But there has been some calls in just this last few hours. I think it was in Kicker not long ago that someone's proposed a instance where 50+1 could go, and there could be 4 strict rules that are adhered to, which would be the location could never be moved, so you could never have a Wimbledon MK Dons situation. The clubs will always be the same, the club colours will always be the same, so you could never have a Cardiff City going from blue to red. The coat of arms or the logo may never change, and we joked off air that John had just gone through that with Leeds' very, very strange badge change. And fan culture must not be overlooked, so standing terraces, etc. And the majority shareholder must fulfil his obligations for a minimum holding period, which would be yet to be defined. So they're 4 good ideas, but you're always going to get that scenario where if you keep it as pure as it is, yes, it will be a brilliant spectacle, and football will belong to the working class man who goes out to work all week and then wants to see his football team play, and the atmosphere will be fantastic. But as John and as Manu have said, the gap between the Premier League and maybe even the Spanish League, which has got quite inflated ticket prices for the average the average wage that's earned in Spain, it becomes a problem. So I suppose it's 6 and 2 3s for me, Bryce.
Yes, indeed. And Manu, if just before we go back to the Hanover potential takeover, you ran a Twitter poll. Once again, you get very good at these Twitter polls, might I say. They're quite enjoyable to see what the reactions are. But how did it fare for the 50+1 stay or go?
73% said stay. It needs to stay. And then we got a lot of interaction on this. Obviously this is a hot topic, and it ranges from it needs to stay to it needs to go. And people, I guess, they're sort of in my camp that are not sure whether it should stay or go. I'm certainly in that camp, but that was one of the Greg Shapiro, for example, said, can't there be a totally torn and can't decide option? I love the tradition, the spirit behind 50+1, but I'm tired of bully clubs not named Bayern having to sell top talent to England because they have so much foreign investment and rich owners on top of their TV money. This is something that you get a lot. And then you, of course, get people like Les Owens saying, I think it should go. Nice concept, but the clubs can't compete with Bayern, can't hold on to their top players and can't compete in Europe. So, I think you get that. And then you get, of course, people saying it needs to stay. It's, investors will ultimately destroy competitions, and you get people saying like, one day the TV bubble is going to burst in England, and these clubs and investors, they will all go and they will leave behind a wasteland. I'm not saying I agree with that, but you get that opinion, right? So it's an interesting one. And I'm not sure that 50+1 is the biggest obstacle to catch up with Bayern. Because when you look at RB Leipzig or Wolfsburg, those are two teams that have the ability to spend a lot of money, but they can't. And I think for them, the big obstacle is financial fair play, which is, of course, a UEFA rule. So this is maybe something to also look at. And then the other thing is, the big topic this year was, of course, the Bundesliga teams in Europe, they're having an off year. Right now I look at it as a blip. It's something that a one-time event, although if it happens next year again, then it's something that we need to start worrying about. But Dortmund were beaten by a team like Nicosia, right? It's not like that Nicosia has a lot more money than Dortmund. And so I almost wonder if it is just 50+1 or if it's other things as well. But I like these ideas that, the things that Chris mentioned with Holtmann, the president of Augsburg. I agree with him. If 50+1 goes, you can set certain parameters that make sure that the people that come in, that they have to sort of play by certain rules. And, the tricky question then, of course, is will clubs and the league actually be able to make sure those rules, that the owners coming in, that they comply to these rules? Because we have, of course, cases in England. And I mean, John, this is something that we've discussed. Taksim, for example, I'm not even going to try to attempt to say his last name, but he went in and bought Manchester City, before the current ownership came in. And, there was so many things that in his place where the FA should have said, no, you can't actually buy a club, but they let him buy Manchester City anyways.
Yeah, I think this is a brave new world that we're entering, and I think my problem with all of this is that people only ever think about the ramifications of things after they've happened. I mean, if the lesson that we have of Brexit is anything to go by, it's that people kind of think after they've acted. And my big worry with a lot of these things is what is it that we're going to lose if we make this big decision? You can't reverse a decision like getting rid of 50+1. We've discussed that before the show. You can't exactly implement the laws now and make it work in terms of EU competition law. What are the things that are lost by getting rid of the 50+1 rule, and will those losses be worse than the benefit that is gained? And I think we see this all the time. It's the same with my issue with VAR. What is it? Well, the actual ramification, not simply the basic ones where you can say, oh, well, there'll be fewer bad decisions, or maybe the flow of the game will be interrupted. What are the sort of underlying permutations that people don't really think through that will eventually rise their ugly heads? And I think that we're really in danger of seeing actually these bad things become more and more obvious as things go on. And what I think 50+1 enshrines is something that actually we are going to start seeing in more and more in years to come, is that people actually do want to have a feeling that football is protected for the fans in some way. Once we just give over ownership of everything to corporate interests, it could be the case that football could eventually die out. Now, that's obviously it's an extreme position to hold, but it's not a question that's raised very often when people talk about these things. And so those would be the sorts of questions that I would raise in my head as a fan of a club who've obviously suffered as a result of rampant corporatism. I've seen the way that it can go badly wrong. I know a lot of clubs in the UK haven't, but we are seeing something which is, I think, probably a denigration of fan experience. And once you lose the fans, you won't have anything. So I think people are dicing with death a little bit when it comes to just making these leagues into cash cows.
Well, we have that in common, John. I have experienced bad investors in my club too. And personally, 50+1 does fall. If it completely goes, Hassan Ismail becomes the owner of 1864. He gets to buy the club for €1. That's something, of course, a lot of people say, well, that's a good thing because he will invest money. But the only time they gave him the free reign at the club was also the year that they got relegated to the third division and ultimately ended up where they are now. So, you're quite right. What happens if we do end up getting rid of 50+1? It's not going to be reversible. That's going to be it, So maybe soften it, but ultimately keep it as the basis of the game. And I think that's something that one of the comments that I received was, and I think this is a good one, the Bundesliga's culture of fan ownership and strong supporter involvement must be protected. Massive inflows of outside capital has distorted the game, and the football world does not need one of its finest competition reduced to a Premier League light. And I think this is, by the way, by Randall Bieler, one of my followers. I think that's a good comment. I think that really nails it down. Like, does the Bundesliga need to be the Premier League light? I think that's something that I've criticized in the past too. There's so much marketing focus on the Bundesliga to become like the Premier League, but really its strengths are that then it's not the Premier League. I'm not saying the Premier League is not a great competition. It really is. It's a fantastic competition, but for very many different ways. So I think you almost benefit as a league by not being the Premier League, because then, you become sort of your own product.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
Manuel, can we just, before we wrap things up, can we just ask how likely this Martin Keane takeover of Hanover is to happen? You mentioned that if he was to take it to courts, the 50+1 rule probably wouldn't stand up. And I'm just reading away about him here, and he's quite the character. He's called his own fans assholes before, and he's called Hanover 96 due to their less than successful history over the last 100 years as a shit club as well. I mean, this sounds like a disaster takeover in the making as well.
Well, I think it's really likely that he's going to get his way, because I think the DFL is going to find a way to appease him so that he's not suing. That doesn't mean there's an end to the story, because Hassan Ismail is trying to find a way to sue as well, right? So this 50+1 rule is under stringent attack right now. And Martin Kind, I think that is a topic for another podcast, Bryce. I think we should actually try to get someone on who's familiar with the topic, with Hannover in particular, and really talk about Martin Kind as a single subject. I personally feel he will get his way. And he's not necessarily the kind of investor who will pump billions of euros into the club and make them into a super club. I don't think that's who he's like. So I'm on the fence on this takeover, but I'm pretty sure it will actually happen.
Interesting times. Let's see how this one pans out. And yes, if you're involved with Hanover, get in touch. Either send us some information, some topics, or maybe we'll get you on a future pod. It sounds like an interesting topic, but that more or less does it for this week. We can only thank Jon Mackenzie for coming on once again, even though Gladbach lost. Jon, what have you got going on this week? Is there anything that you'd like to plug, or where can people find you on likes of Twitter?
Well, you say you only invite me on when Gladbach lose, but they haven't won in, I think they've won 1 in 8. So, maybe I should become more regular. But
we can't have you on every week. Come on, Jon.
Well, the way that they're going at the moment, we could do. No, on Twitter, I am Jon. I'm at Jon_Mackenzie. Jon doesn't have an H, and Mackenzie has an A between the M and the C, making it.
I love that.
Making it very much not a very memorable handle. Well, maybe it is memorable. I don't know. If you want to find my stuff, best to go to Twitter. Most of my stuff goes on there. I do work for a company called Real Sport, and some of my work goes up on there as well. So check those two things out: my Twitter and that website. And thank you very much for having me on again.
Always a pleasure, Jon. I was only kidding. Of course, we could have you on every week. Just a very quick one-word answer. Well, it's probably a few words, but what's the scoreline going to be for Stuttgart, Borussia Mönchengladbach coming up?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Not very high scoring, I'm going to go with. I think this is a sort of game that Gladbach win. So I'll go with 1-0 to Gladbach.
1-0 it is. That means you won't be on next week. Okay. We're going to move on to Chris. You're busy as ever. What have you got going on this week? What would you like to draw people's attention to?
Oh, well, I'll be doing some sort of Pokal roundup probably for either Tuesday or Wednesday's game. And then we've got previews for the weekend. So just keep an eye on either at Football Grad Live or at Chris78 Williams.
Very good, yes. At Football Grad Live, always busy. And that means, Manuel, Veth, you're going to be busy as well. What would you like to draw people's attention to?
Yeah, and Chris said it. Pokal, the previews for all 4 games are on fußballstadt.com. And next week is Champions League and Europa League. It's coming back, so we'll have all the previews for all the Champions League games and all the Europa League games involving Soviet and German, post-Soviet and German clubs. So that will be on Footballgrad and fußballstadt.com.
Yes, very busy and exciting. So head over to at Footballgrad Live on Twitter to get all your football needs, I feel, in the next week. But guys, thanks very much for getting in touch this week. We hope you enjoyed the podcast. You can get in touch with me at Bryce Dunn 11 on Twitter, and that more or less does it for this week. So we'll bid you farewell and say auf Wiedersehen.
Ich warte seit Wochen auf diesen Tag und tanz vor Freude über den Asphalt, als wär's ein Rhythmus, als gäb's ein Lied, das mich immer weiter durch die Straßen zieht. Komm dir entgegen, dich abzuholen.
One gift that never gets returned? Trick question. It's 3 gifts: beer, wine, and spirits. And with Drizzly, you can send the gift of drinks right to your loved one's doors. Drizzly lets you compare prices from local liquor stores on a huge selection of beer, wine, and holiday spirits, then get them delivered right to that lucky someone's door in under 60 minutes. And right now, Drizzly is giving customers $5 off their first order. Just enter promo code JINGLE at checkout. Download the Drizzly app or go to drizzly.com. That's DRIZLY.com.
Thank you for listening to Believe. You can show support to your host by subscribing to the show and giving us a 5-star rating on your preferred platform. Check us out at Believe.com and search for BLEAV on YouTube.